Hello and welcome to Super Nintendo's Unscripted Podcast. My name is Nick, and this is a podcast where I just talk about any kind of subjects that I want to talk about for the next 45 minutes to an hour. So if that is something that you're interested in, consider subscribing if you're new and like the video. Comment down below. Let me see what you guys think of the episode. This also is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you're interested in listening to just the audio person. If you're just tired of looking at my stupid face, that's just for you. But basically, I go over some of my game pickups of the previous week. I also talk about my main channel, what kind of videos I've been posting, what I'm working on, and also just what projects are coming down the pipeline, and also the main topic, which is today, does frame rate matter? I think that'll be a juicy topic, and I am looking forward to seeing what everybody has to say, and I hope to have an interesting take on it, and I hope that it's received well. All right, so starting off, let's take off some game pickups of the week. I didn't really buy anything new. I've been going over this a while, and I, promised myself that I wasn't going to buy anything really significant unless it was like Atari Lynx related. And I'm getting close to pulling the trigger on a couple of games that I've had my eyes on. Prices of the Lynx seem to be cooling down and supply is increasing, so that is something that I'm going to be considering. But what I did do is I did sell some stuff. So I mentioned last time that a couple episodes back that I was going to basically start selling my stuff. I took all of my games, like $5,000 worth of games, to a video game convention that I covered in the previous episode. And I didn't sell everything. I only sold 17 items, but I made a pretty decent amount of money. And I decided that certain things that I was going to sell on eBay, just bigger high ticket items. And I sold a decent amount. I didn't really sell a whole lot. I sold three things. I sold the TurboGrafx Mini, which was $230. That's what I listed it as. And I think afterwards, like, eBay gave me just under $200, which, I only paid $100 for it. So it's really not that big of a deal that eBay took so much, but it still kind of stings a little bit. And it's my main motivation to sell things on Facebook Marketplace or at conventions where people are more likely to pay cash. So that way I can take as much money as possible on these things instead of giving it to these third-party sellers. But the other thing that I sold was the Atari XP games. So I've mentioned this on the podcast a while back, but Atari, they came out with this Atari XP program, and now they just kind of abandoned it, and now they're doing something else. But they were making physical copies of, like, games, and most people will notice that they did the 50th anniversary of like 10 games or something like that for $100 each. They were like re-releases of old Atari games, which was kind of bizarre. But one thing that was interesting is that they released 3 previously unreleased games on the platform. These games had already been on the Atari Classics collection. Like, if you have the one for the Nintendo Switch, the Nintendo Switch has like 150 of them, and all 3 of them on there. And that's Saboteur, Aquaventure, and Yar's Returns. So I bought these because they looked pretty cool, and I was going to do a video on them a long time ago, and I just didn't have the motivation to make one. And then, like, on top of that, some people were reporting that they installed the cartridges backwards, so they couldn't even play. So I never really opened them. But then Atari, they sent replacement cartridges, and then I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna make a video on it. I'm gonna talk about it. But they're just regular Atari games. I mean, they're kind of fun, but also there's really not a lot that you can make out of a video for that. So I decided that I was going to sell them. They don't really pop up on eBay too much. One of the ones that I saw for the regular version, because there's a regular version and then there's the collector's version, and I have the regular version because those were only $50 a piece, and I wanted all three of them. So I was thinking, I was looking for them on eBay to see if anybody was selling them, and I think when I originally looked it up, some people were selling them, like sold the whole set for like $600, and I was looking at it and I was like, well, it's been a very long time. Like no sold listings had ever come up. So I put them up there for 300, I think. And they sold like almost instantaneously. So maybe I should have listed them for more, but then again, like the whole point of selling my games is to actually move them. And since I only paid $150 for the set, $300 seemed pretty good for me. So hopefully whoever gets those wasn't somebody who was going to flip them, and it's actually a person who's very excited to get those. But and then also I had an Xbox 360 with some games that I sold for $80, and that one I sold on Facebook Marketplace, and I had gotten that whole thing for free from a neighbor who was moving away. He's just like, hey, do you want this Xbox 360 with some games? I'll just give it to you. And I was like, sure. And it was like a Jasper model. So and it came with a 120 gig hard drive, but I already had an Xbox 360 Jasper. And I was like, do I really need two? No. So, and plus, like on top of that, a lot of these Xbox 360 games are backwards compatible, so you can play them on the Xbox X, which I have already. So I was like, you know what? I can let it go. And so the guy, like, he met me locally at the police station, and he was just essentially like looking for the system itself, but it was, like I wanted to get rid of the games as well. So $80 cash for that one. So I made a decent amount of money from selling a couple of items, and I still have the analog Mega SG that I want to move. I don't really think that I'm going to be able to sell it for what I want to. I put it up there for like $430 or something like that. So I don't know, but let me know how much you would pay for it, if maybe I should change the price or not. But let's talk about the last video's performance. So I didn't make a main channel video. I'll talk about that in a bit. But I did want to just go over a previous episode where I talked about the Angry Video Game Nerd, James Rolfe, his book. And it was funny because like it didn't really like get any traction, and I was like, well, that's kind of weird. Like usually the Angry Video Game Nerd stuff does fairly well. I wonder what's going on. So I noticed that I titled it Moving Making Nerd instead of A Movie Making Nerd, which was kind of embarrassing. Usually I check my titles, but I must have missed that one. So I changed it. But this time I like left off a movie making nerd thing, and I just put like James Rolfe Angry Video Game Nerd in the title, and it got a decent amount of views for my channel size. It's not like doing gangbusters, but I think 160 views in a week for the podcast this size, I think it's pretty good. I'm still kind of like finding my footing with this podcast and everything, so I'm just kind of just throwing things out there and seeing what works, and it's been a fun experiment to just kind of chill for an hour and just talk about whatever I find interesting instead of like trying to feed an algorithm and get views and everything. It's nice that the video does well and people start to subscribe and they comment and everything, but at the end of the day, like the pressure isn't there for me to make a successful channel. It's just there to make something entertaining. For the next main channel video, I am going to do another Retronomics video. I'm going to talk about NES prices, but not in the way that I normally talk about it. I'm not going to go into it just yet, because I kind of want to, I'm not finished with it yet, but I am trying to make it a little bit more interesting, like retailor it a little bit. Instead of putting the prices in the middle, I think I'm going to put them all the way at the end, and then make like a 20-second subscribe commentary on that. And then, because just the way that the viewing works and stuff, it's almost like people just like stop listening after the prices go. So maybe putting that at the tail end of it will help the algorithm boost it. And like that's kind of the thing, is like, with the podcast, I can just like, I don't really give a shit. Like it just, it's whatever. But with the main channel and stuff, like I actually care a little bit more about, making topics that are interesting, and like also paying attention to the analytics and adjusting accordingly. So hopefully that will be something that pays off. And like, it's also a different, spin on Retronomics, because I do really think that people aren't necessarily too interested in, like, they're interested in watching the prices, but like I don't think that they're 100% interested in watching it, like the speculation part of it, because now as prices have like leveled off, like speculating isn't as fun as it used to be, because like prices have kind of been remaining consistent. So I always got to be thinking on my toes. So let's go in to the main topic here. Does frame rate matter? Frame rate, for those that you don't, you're like, what is frame rate? It's frames per second, which means it's how fast a series of images is displayed on the screen. So the more frames that are per second, the more information is conveyed at once. So basically, it goes back to the film days, because obviously movies were called moving pictures because each piece of frame, it was like one picture and then like moved together to create a moving image. So a lot of like original movies had frame rates between 16 and 20, which is why like when you play them on like a normal set, they look all jerky and stuff, and everybody's like moving super fast and everything. So eventually people settled on 24 frames a second, which is like what this video is set at. And it is one of those things where it's been 24, like in movies, some people mess around with it, but for the most part, any movie that has been shot within the past 100 years is shot at 24 frames a second. So it is one of those things where I think it's, for film, it's set. Like, I think every so often, like, I think Peter Jackson, when he was doing The Hobbit, he shot it at 45 frames a second. And it was mainly because now with motion graphics, it sticks out as a sore thumb when you're putting it on 24 frames a second footage. It just like it doesn't work. So increasing the frame rate of the film and then adding motion graphics is supposed to like build a graph. But I don't know if you've ever seen The Hobbit. It doesn't look really that, it's unsettling a little bit, especially with the way that the motion graphics are set. It just doesn't land. So we're not talking about movies, we're talking about video games. And basically video games, when frame rate hasn't really become like a super major concern for most consumers until the 3D era came about. Basically, if you had a console like the NES, you can like look at it and it's like, oh, if the system couldn't handle it, it would like flicker screens and everything like that. There wasn't really that much juddering. Maybe there was a couple of character sprites that didn't really like weren't really there in order for that 60 frames to go. But really, it's either 30 or 60. I don't really know any game of the NES era that would run less than 60 frames, but I'm pretty sure that you guys can let me know in the comments down below. I didn't really do whole lot of research on the NES, but the Super Nintendo, for example, though, had Star Fox, and Star Fox ran at 20 frames a second. And I think during that time, like the 90s, like we just put up with it because it was so groundbreaking, right? It was one of those things. It's kind of just like going back and watching the original Toy Story and like seeing the lack of detail in the thing, but you're like amazed because those are computer generated things and they look for the most part real. But like, I remember playing Doom on like my PC, and my PC could like just barely run it. And, I think I played those games in like 20 frames or something like that, or it's super juddery, but at least it played, right? So eventually PlayStation comes along. Most PlayStation 1 games ran at 30 frames a second, like Tomb Raider, but a lot of them, like 100 games, ran at 60 frames per second. But, it was mostly like fighting games and everything like that. But, I mean, I do remember, like, I have a PlayStation 2 game that, like, boasted about it running at 60 frames a second. So 60 frames is not an unattainable goal, but a lot of games still run at 30. There was a lot of controversy a long time ago when a game, I think it was Assassin's Creed. Let me check here. Yeah, basically they said like 30 frames is their goal because everything else would be less. Yeah, it was Assassin's Creed Unity that ran at 30 frames a second. And like basically they said the human eye can't see more than 24 frames a second. And basically like they it was just kind of just like one of those things. It was just so funny because a lot of people were just like tests found that fighter pilots watching 250 frames per second video of playful kittens will grow furious if you slip in one single frame. Basically, like the whole thing is that they just made like this really goofy thing. They said like 30 is our goal. It feels more cinematic, and 60 is really good for a shooter. But basically, a lot of people got upset with it because like 30% or 30 frames per second wasn't necessarily the optimal goal, especially since it's 2014. And I think now it's getting a lot more, it's mattering a lot more because these systems come out and they're saying that, had to adjust the ISO here because like I was getting really dark here. So where was I? Yeah, so basically you have Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, and they're coming out with the most powerful systems ever. People are starting to actually buy brand new OLED TVs that do 120 hertz refresh rate. My phone does 120 hertz. Apple's, frame rate is starting to actually, people are starting to take notice of it. And so it kind of is irritating when, we have like these super powerful consoles, but games that come out for the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X or even PC are capped at 30 frames a second. Some of them have like performance modes and everything, but basically it's like either you get graphics or you got frames. You can't get either or. And I personally, I'm not really that concerned about it, but it is one of those things where I would prefer that frames. If I had the option, I would pick 30. I mean, if I had the option, I would pick 60 over 30. Like if you gave me a choice between it, I would probably do that. Graphics, for the most part, aren't really that much of a concern if it comes at the cost of a frame rate that is inconsistent. But basically, like, there's a ton of games that I think there's maybe only like a handful of games that even run at 120 hertz on the Xbox Series X or the PlayStation 5. And I think that's Call of Duty or some first person shooter or something like that. So it's kind of like it's frustrating for a lot of people where the we got these powerful systems and frame rate is still kind of an issue. So like I think that's really the reason why it matters if a game is 30 and not 60. Mainly, there's other people too with, especially if it's capped on a PC. Like, I get, for the most part, consoles. For like if it's capped at 30, I kind of understand. I would prefer it being more, but like when it comes out on a PC, a lot of people like they take issue with it. Like Elden Ring, for example, was capped at 60, and people were kind of upset about it because a lot of when you get a PC, you're usually getting a PC because you want the best, right? Like, or at least better than console. And I think a lot of people, like you got 144 hertz refresh rate monitors, you got more everything like that. That's what you're chasing frames. And like, you get upset when you run benchmarks and it runs at 59 instead of 60 or something like that. So I can understand like when that happens, because like I was looking up Elden Ring because I was like, oh, I kind of want to play Elden Ring on a PC to see, if like, since my PC can run almost everything that you throw at it. And yeah, there was like a hack or something like that people had to unlock the frame rate. Like sometimes the frame rate is tied to gameplay. I know that Fallout is one of those games that's notoriously the engine is tied to the frame rate. So if you get like more than the capped frame rate, then the game moves like super fast. I think now there's workarounds around that, but it is one of those things where it's tied to the game. But I can't think of any other games in the modern era where like the engine is tied to it. Usually the reason why they cap it at 60 is because they know that they can get consistently 60 frames a second or 30 frames a second consistently, because honestly, when you're playing a game, and I know that there will be some people in the comments that will be like, well, I can tell. I cannot personally tell if something is in 30 frames or 60 frames. I can't tell. Unless you like go to 60 and then you move to 30 or something like that. What I can tell is when it drops, like, and that's usually when the game like stutters. But even now, like, there's things like G-Sync and FreeSync, which tie the frame rate to your monitor, so that way frame rates dips aren't as jarring as they used to be. Basically, like anytime that you would have like a frame rate dip, it would be because like the game just couldn't handle everything that's going on the screen. Like for example, Just Cause 3, on most consoles and like PCs, like if there's a lot of explosions at once, like the game will kind of like chug a little bit in order to like render everything at the same time. But for the most part, like if it's consistently 30, I personally I can't tell. Like I was playing Horizon, the first Horizon Zero Dawn game, and I was playing it on a PlayStation 5 because I didn't have a PlayStation 4 at the time, and I was like, this game is running pretty good. It's like running really smooth and everything. And then like I think 2 months after the PlayStation 5 came out, they're like, yeah, we're releasing a performance patch, 60 frames a second. And I was like, oh, okay. So like I did that, and like I mean the game runs smoother, I'm not saying that like we don't need 60 frames a second. I'm just saying that like I personally cannot tell the difference if you were to put both of them in front of me. Like I'm pretty sure that if you were like a professional gamer or something like that, where you needed to play like CS:GO or any other those other competitive games that rely on frame rate, I'm pretty sure that you would notice. But I really just don't. I really don't care. To be honest with you, like I don't see what the outrage is. Like if a game comes out and the frame rate is capped at 30, why do you like I don't see like the uproar behind it. Like um if that matters to you that much, then just don't buy the game, because it's just one of those things where um it just seems trivial to get upset about. Like I can understand like being disappointed by it. Like Starfield is coming out, and I believe that game is going to be locked at 30 on consoles. I don't know if it's going to be um, on PC though, because I know that people were upset. Yeah, so yeah, basically it's going to be running at 30 frames per second on consoles, though your PC will depend on it. So if frame rate does matter, then it is one of those things where, PC at least will let you exceed the frame rate. And like I think that's kind of the crux of the thing. At least like PC gamers can experience it more. But again, like Starfield is a game where frame rate, like I I've played Fallout at 30 frames per second, and like that game moves in a way where like you don't need the extra frames. Like you're just walking around a world, and then like there are a handful of times where like you use the VAT system, where you're targeting on specific areas, and it's not a game where you constantly have to react to the things around you. Like Doom Eternal, for example, I'm playing that game on my PC. I'm getting a solid 144 frames a second on it. The game runs silky smooth, but I'm not any better at it. Like that's the thing. It's like I think I played it on 60 on my laptop because I couldn't get 1080p. The laptop wouldn't run 1080p at 144 frames a second. It would only run 1080p at 60 frames a second. So I think I'm at the same spot where I was when I was playing on my laptop, and I still struggle at the same spot. So I don't really think that like frame rate would make you a better player. Competitively though, I mean, if you're playing against somebody with a 60 frames per second PC and you have double the frames, chances are that you're going to do better than them. I do definitely think like when I'm playing Doom Eternal at 144 frames a second, that my shots are a lot more precise, because definitely like when you're moving the cursor around, you have like a little bit more frames to go off of. If you've ever played a game where it drops frames like that and you're trying to do like precision movement, like you can definitely tell like that your cursor like will move further than what you're doing in real life. But then again, like I mean, you could always adapt to it, but it just, yeah, like for the most part, like all I care about is that it's consistent. Like if it's 30 frames a second and it's a solid 30 frames per second, it doesn't dip below 30 frames a second at all, then I'm okay with it. It's those games where like Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch, that kind of like annoyed the heck out of me, because there are instances in that game where it stutters, and stuttering, like, for a game that looks pretty and everything, it's just it takes you out of it. You're like, it shouldn't really be stuttering like that. Same thing with Breath of the Wild too, and Tears of the Kingdom. Like, I don't mind that it's. I believe Tears of the Kingdom runs at 30 frames per second. I could be mistaken, but there are instances where it definitely like hiccups a little bit, and those are the things that I honestly can't stand. But I mean, like, the games are still fun, but it is one of those things where if like I were to critique a game, I would definitely point that out. But for the most part, like, I don't really have anything else to say about this. Like, I'm 30 minutes into this episode. I thought that I was going to get a little bit longer on there, and I I don't really have anything else to say. It's like really just like I personally just don't chase frames. Like, I have a beefy PC now, and like even then, like, I have a monitor that goes 144 frames a second. I definitely think that like that refresh rate is definitely a lot better when it comes to readability, especially for VR. That's one thing that I forgot to mention here. I'll mention that. It definitely matters for VR. I'll give you that. If you've ever played VR with less than 90 frames a second, I feel sorry for you. Like, um, like that's one of the reasons why when like you're playing Virtual Boy or any of those older headsets, you get motion sickness. Like, that's the biggest deal of VR, and that is one of those things that a lot of people will point to as a great VR experience. And I can tell you firsthand that, yeah, like, frame rate matters based off of that. I've been playing VR also on my new PC, and it is a night and day difference when your computer can actually handle the amount of motion to the point where it's unnoticeable. Like, it's literally just something that I didn't know that I wanted until I had it. I actually, like, it's one of those things where I wish that the PlayStation VR 2 was finally unlocked on PC so that I can give it a go. I don't know if you guys have been following that, but somebody had basically, like, when the PlayStation VR 2 headset came out, it's only one USB-C connection. And so obviously the first thing that some people did was they plugged it into their computer and they were like, hey, does this work? And it recognized it. There wasn't really any encryption on it. So there are a handful of people who are working on getting it to the point where it's actually usable. I think that they've been able to like make it a secondary display, and there's still a lot of other things that need to go in to like access the hardware that's inside the PlayStation VR 2 to actually like make it a compatible headset with PC VR. But getting off topic here, but that's really the only reason why frame rate would matter, like, to the point where it's 100% necessary. Like, do not go below this. But as far as like regular games go, like 30 frames a second is just fine. I don't think that it's cinematic though. Like, that kind of like bugs me a little bit. Like, when you do have 3D graphics and you're running them at like a lower frame rate, it does kind of like take away a little bit of your experience from a gamer perspective. Like, 60 frames a second should definitely be the baseline. Just because, like, if you've ever played any game, like, that's the thing that like is a hang up for me, is like the cinematic feel of it. Like, this video here, like I said before, it's 24 frames a second. I like to keep my stuff at 24, basically because it's easier to render. I've done 60 frames a second videos, and these talking head videos, it doesn't matter. Like the extra frames that you get, it doesn't translate into something that other people would be interested in. I and it also doubles the render time of my videos. Like right now, it doesn't really matter, but it was a thing that it was a thing that I like put it out there, and I was like, do people even notice? And they're like, no. And I don't even think MKH Marquez Brownlee, he does. I think he still does 30 frames per second, but I'm not 100% sure. But you know what? I think this is going to just be a short one. I honestly, I don't have anything else to add to the conversation. I'm going around in circles. And, 36 minutes, I think it'll be okay. If you guys have anything else to add, make sure that you comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Are you guys frame rate snobs where you can't tolerate anything under 60 frames per second? Are you skipping my videos because they're not in 60 frames? Let me know down in the comments below. If you are new here and you like this type of content, consider subscribing. Maybe you put this on on in the background and you like listening to it. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure that you rate the video. It also helps boost that in their algorithm when there's some good rated videos and everything like that. But you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Snicktendo. And that's it. All right, guys, we'll talk to you later. I'm Nick, and this has been fun.